Welcome to The Explainer. You know, every year India's union budget drops. And it's not just about numbers, right? It's really a story about competing ideas. So today, we're going to dive deep into the 2026 budget and look at this huge clash, what the big industry players were begging for versus what the government actually delivered. So why should you even care about this one budget? Well, it's because it's so much more than just a boring spreadsheet. Think of it as the government's game plan, answering a massive question. With the world being so chaotic right now, supply chains are a mess, tech is changing everything. How does India plan to not just get by, but actually come out on top? All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll set the stage with India's economic blueprint. Then we'll look at the pre-budget wish list. After that, the government's big reveal. We'll compare expectations to reality. And finally, the most important part, what it all means for you. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, India's economic blueprint. We're setting the stage for 2026. So what's the big picture? Well, India's budget is basically trying to pull off a really tricky balancing act. The global economy is kind of shaky, right? So the big challenge is, how do you keep your own growth going strong and make sure investors feel confident, all while the rest of the world is so volatile? This budget is pretty much the government's answer to walking that very fine line. Moving on to Section 2, the pre-budget wish list. Let's dig into what the industry experts were really hoping for. You know, this quote from Samir Gupta over at EY, it just hits the nail on the head. He says, businesses look for a strong commitment to tax certainty and streamlined compliance processes. And that's exactly it. More than anything, businesses were just crying out for things to be stable and simple. They wanted a tax system you could actually predict so they could make long-term plans and just, get on with business. And let's be clear, they weren't asking for little tweaks here and there. They wanted a major overhaul. I mean, just look at this. They wanted to take a super complicated tax system with 37 different rates and slash it down to just 3 or 4. That's huge. They also wanted big incentives to get manufacturing fired up again, and to change the laws so that businesses weren't so afraid of making mistakes. It was all about big, bold changes. All right, so that was the wish list. Now for Section 3, the government's big reveal. What do they actually do? Well, they introduced something called the 3 Kartavya framework. So Kartavya basically means duties. In this 3-step framework, it really shows you what the government was thinking. The first duty, to accelerate and sustain economic growth. Number 2, fulfill the aspirations of the people. And 3, ensure access to resources for all. But pay attention to what's number 1. That economic growth piece, that's the engine that's supposed to power everything else. So to get that engine running, the government's main strategy was pretty straightforward. They decided to focus on boosting manufacturing, infrastructure, and creating what they call champion MSMEs. Basically, they're using public money to prime the pump, betting that a huge push in government spending will build the foundation for private businesses to really take off. And when I say a huge push, I mean it. Look at this number, 12.2 lakh crore. That's the proposed public capital expenditure. It's a staggering amount and a really clear sign that the government is going all in, betting that this massive investment from their side will get the whole economy moving. So where is all that money going? Well, a big chunk is for projects just like these, what they're calling new growth connectors. We're talking about 7 new high-speed rail lines linking major economic hubs across the country. Think about it, connecting places like Mumbai to Pune or Delhi to Varanasi. The idea is to make it way faster and cheaper to move goods, services, and people, which should, in theory, supercharge growth in those areas. Okay, here we go. Section 4, expectations meet reality. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's do a side-by-side scorecard and see how that industry wish list actually stacked up against what was announced. And right away, you can see a totally different approach. The expectation was for a broad rationalization of TDS, that tax withholding system. Remember, they wanted to simplify 37 rates down to just a few. But what was the reality? Targeted rate cuts. The government didn't take a sledgehammer to the whole system. Instead, they took a scalpel and made very specific cuts, like for overseas tour packages and sending money for education abroad. It really was a case of targeted relief, not a systemic overhaul. And you have to ask why? Well, think about it. A targeted cut gives a specific group of people, in this case, the middle class, an immediate tangible benefit. a massive systemic reform that's messy, it takes years, and you don't feel the good stuff right away. So this was a very strategic choice for a quick win over a long, complicated overhaul. And we see that same surgical approach here again. The expectation was for broad investment incentives, like bringing back accelerated depreciation for all of manufacturing. But the reality? Super specific, sector-focused support. The government offered a massive tax holiday all the way until 2047, but only for foreign cloud service providers setting up data centers in India. They're not spreading the love. They're picking a winner and placing a huge long-term bet on a high-tech sector. And finally, on the legal front, yep, you guessed it, same story. The expectation, coming from a major think tank, was to decriminalize a dozen tax offenses completely, get rid of the criminal penalties. The reality, well, the government rationalized the penalties. They didn't get rid of them, but they did reduce the maximum jail time for minor offenses and let courts convert them to fines instead. So they moved in the right direction, but they stopped short of what was asked for. It's a classic compromise. Okay, so that's a lot of policy talk. Let's get to Section 5 and bring this all down to earth. What it means for you, the bottom line. First up, that targeted tax cut we talked about, that's a real win for a lot of people. The tax you pay upfront, the TCS rate, on overseas tour packages and money for education is now down to 2%. That's a nice little saving that you'll feel right away. But on the other hand, if you're a trader in the stock market, listen up. The Securities Transaction Tax, or STT, on futures trading has actually gone up. It's now 0.05%. Now, it sounds like a tiny number, but if you trade a lot, those small costs can definitely add up. And this is a really important one. On the healthcare side, there's some great news. The customs duty on certain imported life-saving drugs has been slashed in half, from 20% down to 10%. This is a big deal, and it's going to provide some serious relief for people who rely on these critical medicines. So, when you step back and look at the whole picture, what's the big takeaway? It's that this budget delivered targeted relief and made some very strategic bets on specific sectors instead of going for those broad structural tax reforms everyone was talking about. It was about precision strikes, not a complete overhaul. And all of this leaves us with one big final question, doesn't it? Will these targeted reforms, these very specific strategic bets, will they be enough to keep India on its ambitious growth path, especially with the world being as unpredictable as it is? Is this the right recipe to build that Viksit Bharat, that developed India of the future? Only time will tell.